They thought no one would ever defend you, that they could slander your name behind your back, laugh about it in rooms you'd never enter, and keep smiling, as if God wasn't watching. But what they didn't know is that heaven had already taken notice. And more than that, God was already preparing someone, not just anyone, someone chosen, appointed, your true soulmate, the one who didn't just feel your pain from afar. They heard what was said about you, and something inside of them, something holy, refused to let it slide. They couldn't keep quiet. They wouldn't let your name be dragged one more inch through the mud. And now, the narcissist who thought they got away with it, they're about to regret everything. Because this isn't some soft-spoken love story. This is God's justice, rising through someone who didn't come into your life to play games, but to protect what's sacred, you. And just so we're clear, what you're hearing right now is not recycled, not re-uploaded, and not stolen. This is the original message, told exactly as it was revealed, right here on C.S. Lewis 2025. The only official channel dedicated to prophetic justice, spiritual discernment, and God's response to narcissistic abuse. Because when the enemy sends someone to assassinate your character, God sends someone to restore your honor. And this time, they're not backing down. So stay with me, because what happens next will shake you. The tables are turning, the liar is being exposed, and the one who truly loves you, they've just stepped into the battle. And they're fighting like heaven sent them. The narcissist crossed a line heaven will not ignore. There comes a point where mistreatment stops being a mistake and becomes a choice, a spiritual violation, a moment when someone doesn't just hurt you, they intentionally desecrate the dignity God placed upon your life. The narcissist in your story didn't stop at betrayal. They didn't stop at abandonment. They kept going. They whispered lies behind your back, twisted your truth into entertainment, and smeared your name not just to justify their sin, but to erase their guilt. And each time they opened their mouth, they tried to bury you deeper. But here's what they forgot. You were never standing alone. You are not just a person. You are a child of God. And every word they used against you, every insult, every proud smirk, every mocking retelling of your pain, didn't just hit your reputation. It touched the presence of God resting on your life. At first, you may have felt powerless. You probably tried to stay kind. You prayed. You forgave. You took the higher road. And yet they mistook your silence for weakness, your mercy for permission. And in their mind, you were easy to control, even easier to discredit. But what they didn't know was that your restraint wasn't weakness, it was sacred. Because in your silence, you were handing them over to God. And God was watching as they twisted what you said. Watching as they bragged about how over you they were, while secretly obsessed with tearing you down. Watching as they bragged to others, maybe even to people you loved, that you were the problem, that you were crazy, unstable, too sensitive, or too much. But here's what the narcissist will never understand. When you slander a child of God, you're not just gossiping. You're mocking the Creator who formed them. You're challenging the voice of heaven that speaks identity over that soul. And God does not take that lightly. Do not touch my anointed ones. Do my prophets no harm. Chronicles 16:22. There is a spiritual weight to dishonor. And when dishonor is directed at someone God has covered, that weight becomes judgment. Quiet, deliberate, divine. The narcissist thought they were clever, that they could spin stories and you'd never know, that they could lie without consequence, that no one would ever rise up and say, enough. But heaven saw the breaking point. And while they were still talking, still lying, still laughing, God was already preparing someone, not a friend, not a family member, but someone chosen, someone holy, someone whose soul couldn't stay quiet when yours was being torn apart. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't gossip fighting gossip. This was a spiritual reckoning, because there comes a time in the life of every believer where God says, "That's enough. I will now fight for you." And when God fights for you, He doesn't always send fire from the sky. Sometimes He sends a person, a defender, a soul who knows what it feels like to be broken and will not let it happen to you again. That's where your true soulmate enters. And their entrance? It didn't come with flowers or promises. It came with holy fury, with discernment, with a voice that finally spoke what no one else dared to say. Don't ever speak their name like that again. They are not who you say they are. I won't stand by while you destroy someone God has clearly covered. And just like that, the narcissist's illusion began to crumble. Because what they thought was free rein to ruin you, God had already restricted. What they thought was a closed case, God had reopened. And what they thought would never be challenged had just been confronted by someone sent directly from heaven. So, no, you didn't have to fight for yourself, because God raised up someone who would do it with clean hands, a pure heart, and a voice backed by the full weight of divine timing. The narcissist crossed a line, but it was heaven that drew it. And now everything is about to change. But just when it seemed like no one would speak up, God answered, not with thunder, but with someone you never expected. When God sends someone to stand up for you, it's not just love, it's a revelation. It doesn't happen often in life. Most people stay quiet. They hear the slander, they witness the injustice, they notice the cruelty, and yet they choose silence, because silence is safe, because the price of standing up for truth is often rejection, misunderstanding, and conflict. But when God sends someone, truly sends someone, to speak on your behalf, not to flatter you, not to impress you, but to shield your name from being torn apart, you're not just witnessing loyalty, you're witnessing a holy moment. This wasn't just someone who liked you. This wasn't someone doing what was easy. This was someone moved by conviction, stirred by the Spirit of God, driven not by emotion, but by righteousness. They stood up for you, not in the comfort of private conversation, but in the tension of confrontation. They heard your name being twisted, mocked, disrespected, and while others may have smirked or stayed silent, they burned inside. Because something about what they heard didn't just offend their ears, it offended their spirit. And when that happens, when your soul is grieved by evil being spoken over someone innocent, that's not personality. That's anointing. That's discernment. That's a divine assignment calling you to act. And that's exactly what this person did. They chose truth over comfort, integrity over reputation, justice over passivity. They didn't do it to be noticed. They didn't even do it to earn your approval. They did it because God revealed to them who you really are. And once you see someone through God's eyes, you cannot let them be misrepresented. You can't hear lies about them and just carry on like it doesn't matter. When God puts His hand on someone's life and you recognize it, your silence becomes agreement. If you do nothing, this person refused to be complicit. They didn't raise their voice because they were angry. They raised it because the Spirit of truth rose in them like fire. They couldn't stay seated. They couldn't let the lies go unchecked, because the voice of slander is bold, and the voice of truth must be bolder. This wasn't a romantic gesture. It was a spiritual stand, a declaration in the spirit realm that said, you will not speak that way about someone God is protecting. What makes it even more profound is this. They did it without you knowing. They didn't rush to you afterward to get credit. They didn't parade their defense like a trophy. In fact, you may have never known about it unless God revealed it, because that's the mark of someone sent from heaven. They don't protect to be seen, they protect because they're called. And in that moment they passed a test you didn't even know was being given. Because this is where most people fail. They say the right things when they're with you. They post the right words. They act supportive when it's convenient. But when you're not in the room, when the crowd turns, when the accusations come, when someone tries to reduce your worth to a rumor, they disappear. But not this one. This one didn't flinch. They stood their ground. And in doing so, they became more than just a kind soul. They became evidence. Proof that not everyone will fail you. Not everyone will stay quiet. Not everyone will betray you when it costs them something to stand beside you. It's in moments like this that God reveals what love truly is. Not the butterflies, not the pretty words, but the courage to speak when it's dangerous, the strength to stand alone, the spiritual sensitivity to recognize this isn't just gossip, this is warfare, and to fight it without waiting for applause. Because when someone defends you before they're ever invited into your life, you are witnessing the fruit of someone who's already been listening to God about you. And that kind of soul can't be manufactured. They're not driven by what they want from you. They're drawn to what God has placed on you. And if you ever wondered what it looks like when heaven sends love, this is it. If someone ever defended you when you weren't in the room, not because they had to, but because their spirit couldn't stay silent, type below, God showed them who I was, and they stood up for me. And while that one voice rose to defend you, something else began to crumble. The illusion the narcissist built around your name. The narcissist is now living in the fallout of their own lies. When truth enters a room, lies begin to tremble. Not immediately, not always visibly, but spiritually, atmospherically, undeniably. The narcissist who once felt invincible when speaking your name in vain, who weaponized your silence and mistook your stillness for defeat, has now been exposed. And it didn't require you to fight for yourself. It didn't even require your presence. All it took was one voice, sent by God, to confront the deception. And suddenly, the narrative they built began to collapse. You see, narcissists survive by controlling perception. They thrive in secrecy, in manipulation, in planting seeds of doubt about who you are, while wearing a mask that convinces others they're the victim. For a while they succeed. They charm the weak-willed. They deceive those who don't know your character. They turn whispers into weapons and gossip into gospel. But when God decides the time for exposure has come, no amount of charisma can protect a liar from truth. And in your case, God didn't just strip away the mask. He let someone else rip it off publicly. Now, the narcissist finds themselves in unfamiliar territory, without control. The words they once used so confidently have begun to echo back at them with new meaning. People are beginning to see through them. The same stories they told about you no longer land the same way. The smirk that once made others laugh now makes people uncomfortable. The pride they carried like armor now feels like weight around their neck. This is the beginning of regret. Not the kind that leads to repentance, but the kind that leads to fear, exposure, and consequence. There is something profoundly terrifying for a narcissist about losing the ability to manipulate perception. And now, as they realize that someone has stood up for you, that someone saw through their act, the fear begins to rise. They may not say it out loud, they may even double down for a while, but inside, their world is unraveling, because the power they thought they had was built on lies, and lies always decay under the heat of truth. What they underestimated most was that God does not forget what man tries to bury. Every time they misused your name, God recorded it. Every false tale, every mocking word, every boast about winning over you. It didn't disappear. It built a case, not in your hands, but in heaven's. And now the weight of that case is pressing down on their life, and they don't know why things suddenly feel heavy. They don't understand why the ease they once lived in has turned into discomfort, why they no longer walk into rooms with the same confidence, why the people who once believed them now hesitate before nodding along. That's the spiritual cost of slandering someone anointed by God. There is no peace in falsehood. There is no rest for the soul that tries to destroy what God has called his own. The narcissist is now living in that reality. What once seemed like victory now tastes bitter. What once made them feel powerful now leaves them hollow. They are not being punished by your revenge. They are being corrected by spiritual law. The kind of law that doesn't need your approval to act, because it moves on God's timing, not yours. And perhaps what troubles them most is not that you are gone, but that someone else has stepped in. Someone who sees you clearly. Someone who cannot be manipulated. Someone who is not swayed by theatrics, but rooted in truth. This new presence, the one who defended you, is now a mirror the narcissist cannot avoid. A reflection of everything they failed to be. A reminder of what real character looks like. And in that reflection they are forced to reckon with the one thing they've tried to outrun their entire lives, themselves. But as the lies fell apart and the narcissist faded into their own consequences, something far more powerful stepped in. Love. Real love. The kind heaven authors after the storm. God reveals what real love looks like. When someone fights for you before they ever try to win you, it changes something inside you. It rewrites the definition of what love even means. You begin to realize that love was never supposed to be confused with attention, that loyalty is not measured by promises whispered in private, but by actions taken when your back is turned. And now, standing in the aftermath of the chaos, with the narcissist exposed and your name finally defended, something entirely new is beginning to rise. Clarity. This person, the one God sent, didn't come into your life with grand speeches or empty gestures. They didn't need to, because their love didn't begin with attraction. It began with alignment. They were aligned with heaven's perspective about you, which means they saw your value long before they ever approached you with their own desires. They didn't need to be convinced that you were worth protecting. They knew it, spiritually, deeply, instinctively. And that kind of love cannot be faked. There's a different kind of safety that comes when someone has already proven who they are before they even ask to be close to you. You're no longer looking for signs of sincerity. You've already seen it. Not in their eyes, but in their courage. Not in their flattery, but in their actions. You watched them defend what mattered to God, and in doing so, they showed you what real covering looks like. And now you know, love doesn't always look like a romantic pursuit. Sometimes it looks like a shield raised in your absence. Sometimes it looks like someone drawing a line and saying, "You will not harm them again." This person is different. Not just in personality, but in posture. They don't stand over you or behind you. They stand beside you. Not competing with your calling, but complementing it. Not overshadowing your light, but protecting it from the winds that tried to blow it out. Their presence doesn't make you shrink, it makes you breathe easier. For the first time, you're not being watched for weakness. You're being seen for who you really are, not through the eyes of criticism, but through the lens of purpose. What they offer you is not performance, it's peace. It's not possession, it's partnership. And you don't have to beg for it, you don't have to chase it. You don't have to explain your worth to them, because God already revealed it to them long before they came near. And because they heard from Him, they approached you differently. They approached you with reverence, not entitlement, with steadiness, not impulse, with responsibility, not games. It may take time for you to trust it. After all, betrayal teaches you to second-guess even the good. But there's something undeniable about the fruit of this person's life. They carry integrity, like it's woven into their DNA. They move slowly, not because of hesitation, but because they understand the weight of your heart. They've seen what you've been through, if not directly, then spiritually. And they are not here to repeat that cycle. They are here to break it. And maybe the most healing part of it all is this. They didn't wait for you to be ready before they did what was right. They didn't wait until it was convenient. They stood up in your defense, not to earn your affection, but because it was the righteous thing to do. That's how you know they were sent by God. Because love that comes from heaven doesn't need to be asked to protect. It's already prepared to. Now, with the noise of the past fading behind you, and the presence of something real unfolding before you, you can finally start to let your guard down. Not because you're naive, but because you're discerning. You recognize the difference between someone who wants access to your life and someone who has already shown they're willing to protect it, even from a distance. This is not fantasy. It's not too good to be true. It's simply what love looks like when it's authored by God. And as you stand in the safety of what God has now revealed, you begin to realize the truth about your past. It wasn't punishment. It was preparation. The narcissist was the test, but this soulmate is the fulfillment. Looking back, it all makes sense now. The heartbreak, the confusion, the slander, none of it was random. It was a refining fire, a classroom, a proving ground. And at the center of it was a divine lesson. Who you allow to speak over your life matters, because not every voice is sent by God. The narcissist was never meant to stay. They were meant to reveal what your soul needed to be healed from. They were a counterfeit, sent ahead of the real thing, not to bless you, but to expose what you've tolerated for far too long. You see, the narcissist's greatest weapon wasn't just manipulation, it was imitation. They mimicked empathy, they mimicked loyalty, they mimicked intimacy. And for a time, they convinced you it was love. But it wasn't. It was control dressed up in affection, performance masked as passion. Their love was transactional, conditional, self-serving. You were not seen, you were used. And when your usefulness ended, so did their commitment. But here's the deeper truth. God allowed it. Not to destroy you, but to prepare you. He allowed the narcissist to get close, not because you were weak, but because you were strong enough to outgrow them, strong enough to survive what was sent to break you, strong enough to endure the lie long enough to learn the truth. That's why God let them speak, let them slander, let them mock, because the time was coming when you would no longer cry over their absence. You would thank God for it. And now that time has come. The silence of the narcissist isn't peace, it's exposure. They are no longer in your life because they were never meant to carry the weight of who you're becoming. God didn't just remove them, He replaced them. Not with a rebound, but with a revelation. Not with someone who would mirror your past, but with someone who would walk with you into your calling. The soulmate that has entered your story didn't come to play a part. They came to stay for the mission. This is not someone who idolizes you or depends on you for their identity. This is someone who recognizes what you carry, spiritually, emotionally, and prophetically, and chooses to honor it. Not out of infatuation, but out of spiritual recognition. They see you not through eyes of lust, but through the lens of purpose, and in their eyes, you don't just feel wanted, you feel safe. This is the person who will walk with you in truth, who will guard your heart, not because they're perfect, but because they fear God more than they fear losing you. They've seen what darkness tried to do to you, and they've already chosen to be light. This is the fulfillment, the one God was preparing in the background while the narcissist was performing on the surface. And that's what makes it so redemptive, because the very moment the enemy thought he had you surrounded in despair, God was orchestrating a turning point, a divine exchange, a soul that would not only defend your name, but carry it with integrity. Someone who would restore what was stripped without trying to replace who you are. You're no longer in the season of survival. You're stepping into alignment. You no longer have to prove your worth to those who were never meant to understand it. The lesson is complete. The test is over. And what stands before you now is a reflection of how much God truly loves you, not because you endured, but because you finally let Him choose. The narcissist thought they were the main character in your story, but they were only the introduction. They were the warning label before the blessing. And the one who stands with you now? They're not the rebound. They are the reward. This was never about losing love. It was about finding what was holy. You thought you lost something. Maybe for a long time you believed that what the narcissist took from you was unrecoverable. Your peace, your name, your trust, your sense of safety. You walked through nights where you questioned your worth, begged heaven for answers, and tried to make sense of why someone who said they loved you could be so eager to destroy you. But now you see it. They were never sent to love you. They were allowed to expose what you could no longer carry. The need to be chosen by someone who didn't even see you clearly. Their betrayal wasn't a detour. It was a divine unveiling, because sometimes God allows the imitation to get close, so you'll never confuse it with the real thing again. This was never about what you lost. It was about what you were meant to gain: clarity, discernment, strength, and the revelation that real love doesn't confuse you, silence you, or abandon you when you're under attack. Real love defends. And God knew that after all the lies, all the false promises, all the manipulation, you didn't need someone to romance you. You needed someone who would war for you. So He sent someone, not just a partner, not a perfect person, but a protector, a witness, a defender whose loyalty wasn't bought with charm, but built in prayer. This person wasn't your reward for pain. They were the evidence that heaven never turned away, that God kept the receipts, that He saw what was done to you in secret, and He planned a vindication so public, so undeniable, that not even your enemies would be able to deny it. God didn't just bring you out. He brought you through. He didn't just silence the liar. He rewrote the narrative. And He did it through someone who didn't just see you, but saw the anointing on your life. Someone who didn't just hear what was said about you, but couldn't rest until they stood up and declared, "This is not who they are. I know who they are. I see what God has placed on them, and I won't let this lie stand." You are not the same person who was once weeping in the dark, wondering if anyone would ever stand up for you. You are not the abandoned. You are not the broken. You are not what they said. You are the defended, the restored, the vindicated, the one God called worthy of protection. Not in secret, but in the sight of all who once misunderstood your value. So let the past remain where it belongs, exposed, emptied, and irrelevant. Let those who spoke against you sit in the silence they earned. You owe them no explanation. What God has done in you, through you, and for you is its own testimony. Because when God redeems a story, He doesn't return it to what it was. He resurrects it into what it was always meant to be. And this holy fire-forged, defended version of you is proof that heaven never stopped writing. And now, as you step forward, not bitter, but bolder, not wounded, but wiser, may every breath you take remind the enemy you survived what was meant to silence you, And not only did you survive, you rose, covered, chosen,